All right, welcome to the next podcast episode of our Clear Preaching podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan McClintock, and I want to talk to you today about domain number 3 of the Clear Preaching framework, and this is the domain called clarity of language. The last couple episodes, we looked at the first two domains, clarity of thought and clarity of structure. But the domain clarity of language is going to ask this question: are your words illuminating your idea or quietly obscuring it? Are your words illuminating the idea or quietly obscuring it? You see, everything that happens in domains 1 and 2, clarity of thought, clarity of structure, is invisible to your congregation. They never see your thinking and they never see your outline. What they do encounter from your first word to your last in the sermon is your language. It's the only surface thing that they have access to. And most preachers really have never systematically evaluated it. We understand it to a certain level, but most often we don't evaluate it very systematically and look at it in depth. And this is what we're going to do. This domain, clarity of language, is going to force us to look at the language that we bring to the sermon. First of all, what is this domain not about? This domain is not about simplifying theology. Yes, we want to make sure, and we're going to talk about this in a minute, that these theological terms that we're going to preach about, we have to talk about them. So it's not about simplifying theology, watering down theology. It's going to be about more clarifying it and making it understandable and relevant, which we'll get to in a minute. So this domain is not about simplifying theology. It's not about avoiding depth either. We've got to probe the very depths of these theological truths that Scripture gives us. So it's not about avoiding depth. And it's also not about the preacher going down to the lowest common denominator either. I know the audience will have all kinds of different people who understand all kinds of different aspects about Scripture, from a lot and a great deal of understanding of Scripture and the language of Scripture, and then those that understand very little, if any, because of no exposure to it. So it's not about simplifying theology. It's not about avoiding depth. It's not about preaching to the lowest common denominator either. What it is about is making truth accessible, making truth accessible to everybody that hears you, which is really a different and more demanding task than making it accurate. Of course, it needs to be accurate, it needs to be precise, but it also needs to be accessible. People need to be able to access what you are saying. We'll look at 3 different failure modes of this clarity of language. Where does it fail? Where does it fall apart? Where does it fall flat? The first failure mode 1, is abstraction without translation. An abstract concept without fully translating and making it accessible. Theological language is inherently abstract. Sanctification, propitiation, sovereignty, grace, you can name many, many more words. These words carry real meaning. They're very accurate. They're accurate words. One thing you learn in school and college, any higher education, you learn the importance of being accurate, choosing your words carefully because you want to be accurate. You want to be precise. But when it comes to preaching, yes, you want to be accurate, but you also want to be accessible. So this theological language is inherently abstract. But abstract language, never made concrete, will pass over the congregation rather than land with them. We don't want these abstract concepts to pass over the heads of our audience. We want it to land with them. We want them to access it and grab it and embrace it, understand it. So the discipline in this area, in this domain, is to translate every abstraction. Don't remove it. Don't just decide, I don't want to talk about it now because no, make it visible to the hearer. They need you to make truth visible to them, not simple or necessarily, but visible. So let's look at one specific word here, the word justification. Many people might understand it to an extent, that when we look at it in a theological sense, and it really is a legal term, so we need to make this word, we're going to talk about it and preach about it, introduce this idea of justification in our message. Maybe the text we are reading is talking about it. So we can't avoid it. We need to talk about it, but how do we make it accessible? Well, we give it a definition, a declaration. It's a declaration of righteousness. And then we're going to give maybe an illustration or an example. Imagine a man who's genuinely committed a crime and he stands before a judge and he is guilty. He has no defense. He can't defend himself. He knows he's guilty. Everybody else knows he's guilty. But then someone steps forward who has the authority and the means to satisfy the court's demands, the law's demands fully, and the penalty is paid, the record is cleared, and the judge declares not guilty. You can go free. Now, the judge never says the man never did it, but he declares that the legal standing of the man has changed. And the man walks out that courtroom not as a criminal waiting punishment, but as the one the court now regards as righteous before the law. So giving it a definition and an example is one idea and one step. And we're going to talk in just a minute. Really, there's 4 steps you want to look at when you want to make these abstract truths accessible and understandable. The second failure mode is this idea of terminological inconsistency, where terms are used inconsistently throughout the sermon. Every time you use a different term for the same concept, you create a small comprehension issue in the listener's eyes, in the listener's ears. When you use and introduce a term and then that same concept you're talking about a little later on, you use a different word for it, a different term for it. There is an aspect of clarity in our language and in the structure of the sermon and in the delivery of the sermon. There's an aspect of clarity that we need to stay consistent with key language and key phrasing. When you introduce a term and you start using that, you want to use that consistently throughout the message. And every time you come back to that idea, you want to use that term again, that key language and key phrasing, so that we don't hurt comprehension and understanding. So using that key term the same way. The central idea also, secondly, needs to accumulate weight across the sermon, that take-home truth. And it can't land with weightiness and the audience feel that weight of this truth that you're delivering if it keeps appearing under a different disguise. You mention it one way, and then later on in the sermon, you kind of change the words up and mention it in a different way. There are times when that works and times when that's good, but the goal needs to be is comprehension, understanding, and this inconsistency of these terms can hurt. So again, key language and phrasing showing up throughout the message. Identify that central idea early in preparation. Commit to it. Use it consistently. Need to have consistency in language so that the audience grasps it, understands it, and can hold on to it and clearly get the concept that you are talking about. All right, failure mode number 3 is the impression of profundity. That's a fun word to say. Talk about language that sounds really deep and profound, but requires decoding. The audience is saying, man, that sounds really deep. That sounds really smart. But what are they meaning by that? Using long sentences or passive constructions, vocabulary that's used more to signal theological seriousness than really to illuminate truth. It's to show maybe what the preacher knows more than it is to really communicate understandable, graspable, accessible truth. So also be careful. I would say be careful with alliteration that's spoken sometimes. Sometimes preachers can go overboard on alliteration. It sounds good. We know it's for the ear, so it sounds good. But sometimes we can force words because they sound good together. It matches, but the actual terms or words used aren't accurate or precise enough. And so the sound is great, but the meaning gets lost. The meaning gets muddled. So be careful with that. The congregation senses something important is being said, but they just can't quite get it, quite understand it. And oral communication, a sentence that requires decoding, has already failed. If the sentence requires a lot of explaining, it's already failed. So avoid the impression of profundity. Give sentences and thoughts, ideas that don't require decoding. Let's look at the oral medium. The preaching is an oral medium. It is an oral skill. So preaching, in some ways, demands more of language than writing does. Preaching sometimes demands a little more different than of language than writing does. Because if a reader sits down with a book, a reader can slow down, reread a sentence, look up a word, revisit a paragraph. So you can be really profound in writing. You can write huge words that nobody else knows, but the reader can stop and go to dictionary.com and look it up. You can't do that in oral communication. The reader can slow down, reread a sentence, look up a word, revisit a paragraph. What was that he said? Go back 6 or 7 pages and read that. That's what a reader can do. A listener can't. A listener can't pause the preacher. How many times have we wanted to pause? I've wanted to pause myself. Want to pause the preacher. You can't do that. How many times have you wanted to rehear a sentence, but it was spoken once and it's gone? You don't really have time to look anything up, because if you pause in the middle of a sermon, pull out your phone and look up something, that 20 to 30 seconds it takes you to look up something, you might have missed something really key in the sermon. You don't get a chance to hear things again. So preaching sometimes demands more of language than writing actually does. The standard for language clarity in preaching is higher than in writing, not lower. So a good tool to use is just read aloud. As the primary way you're auditing what words you're using, language you use, read your sermon aloud, not for delivery practice, although that's good too. You need to do that at some point. But read the sermon aloud for a language audit. And because when you read aloud, you're going to approximate as much as possible the listener's experience of hearing. You could also record yourself saying it. Record it audibly. Just you pull out your phone, pull out the voice recorder app and read it. So you can also hear yourself saying it, but then you can go back to the recording and listen to it again. So you can kind of approximate and replicate a little bit the listener's experience. Read the manuscript aloud, read the notes aloud. Sentences that are unclear and that slow you down, take notice of those. Mark those sentences, rewrite them. Do an audit on the language that you're using in your sermon. Is it accessible? Is it understandable? Is it graspable by your audience? I want us to look at also next this translation discipline. I want us to go back when we talked about making theological terms, taking them from abstract to concrete. I want us to look at this way of doing it, taking it even a step further. I showed you that, we can give a definition of justification, give that definition, and also maybe give a little example. But you can take it even further to really help people understand, especially when these concepts are really important in the sermon. There's 4 steps to taking abstraction into concreteness that I want to share with you. 4 steps. Number 1, a definition. State explicitly what the term means in plain language. Definition. 2nd, illustration. Show the abstraction a specific concrete scenario. In this stage, just make it understandable. It might not be completely relevant to the audience. That step's coming in a second. But show the abstraction a specific concrete scenario. Illustrate it. Make it understandable. Thirdly, give an example. Here's where you want to make it relevant. Give a real-world instance that somebody in your congregation that you're talking to, preaching to, possibly has experienced or is experiencing. Make it relatable. Make it relevant. So definition, illustration, example, make it relevant. And then 4, you can also use a contrast. You can show what the concept is not alongside what it is. So let's do that with a term. And I'm going to use a term that most people probably think they know the definition of, and for the most part, they probably do. But there's so many different angles that you can come at it from Scripture. I want us to look at the word faith. Somebody thinks, well, faith doesn't need to be defined, and and give an example, an illustration, and contrast? I beg to differ because these theological terms, we don't want to lose the depth of them, right? We want to be able to explain. So this idea of faith, you can give a definition. Faith, that means complete trust or confidence or reliance on someone or something, often encompassing firm belief without tangible proof. Maybe even give a scripture, Hebrews 11:1. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Faith, when we're talking about faith today in this message, we're talking about faith that is complete trust and confidence and reliance on someone. We're talking about God today, without maybe even tangible proof, not maybe even evidence. That's faith. Let me make it understandable for you today. That bridge that crosses over from this city to that city, maybe you give that specific where you're at. Every morning, thousands of people drive across that bridge. Millions of people cross bridges every day that they've never structurally inspected, never reviewed the engineering specs for, and they couldn't evaluate them even if they tried to. And when they approach the bridge, they don't slow down at the edge and think, oh, I wonder if this will hold up. But instead, without even thinking, they drive across at full speed, coffee in hand. They can't see the steel tensioning inside the concrete, but they act fully without hesitation on what they believe to be true about it. That illustration makes faith a little more concrete, a little more understandable. Then give them an example. Make it relevant. Maybe there's a parent in this room today. Or maybe you've known a parent who had a child that had to go through a surgery. And I remember his parent walks in that waiting room and is handed a consent form authorizing their child's surgery. They got to sign their name on it. And in doing so, they're handing their most precious possession, that little child, to a surgeon they met one time. In a building full of strangers to do something they don't even fully understand. They don't know about the surgery. They don't know how it all works. And while they wait in a room down the hall, unable to help, they sit there. They can't be in the room. They can't watch. They can't intervene. And they sign anyway because of what they know about the surgeon's training, what they know about his reputation, what they know about his track record. They have complete reliance and no control. Wow. That lands, right? That makes it relevant. There's a parent in the room who maybe has faced that, or maybe they haven't faced that, but they've got a child and they imagine themselves, they put themselves in that person's shoes. So giving a definition and then giving an illustration that might not be totally relevant, but people can understand it with that. But then you give it a relevant illustration, application example, trying to make it real for people in the room. And you can also use the fourth thing, you can also use contrast. Faith is not pretending uncertainty doesn't exist. Faith is acting on what you can't fully verify. Faith is not feeling that fluctuates. Faith is confidence that moves. Faith is not the absence of doubt. Faith is the decision not to be ruled by doubt. Definition, illustration, example, contrast. 4 ways you can bring the abstract theological concept and make it concrete. As we close in this podcast, I hope this helps you as you work on your sermon this week. But one thing, before your next sermon, find the 3 most abstract sentences in your manuscript or notes. Find the 3 most abstract ones and read each one aloud. Write a translation for each. One sentence that makes the abstraction concrete. How can you make the abstraction concrete? How can you take definition or illustration or uh, example or contrast, and how can you make that concept, that thought, that idea, make it concrete for your listeners? Don't preach the abstract sentence. Don't preach it without the translation really in close proximity. You want to make sure that language is accessible. The last domain in this framework of this clear preaching framework is the fourth framework, clarity of delivery. So the next episode, and we're going to look at in the last one in this series, in many ways, the most underaddressed domain in everything that's been written about preaching. The disciplines that happen in real time in the moment of preaching. This was my doctoral uh, project, was looking at oral clarity, the clarity, discipline clarity of delivering the sermon, those verbal and nonverbal cues that we give an audience as we are delivering the sermon to help them track with us, to keep them from getting lost, and to bring understandability and accessibility into the sermon. So this is very important. And so we'll talk about the clarity of delivery in our next episode. Everything you built in the first three domains will either land or fall apart here in clarity of delivery. See you next week.